The schoolhouse door hit Lydia Mercer square in the back as Reverend Pritchard shoved her belongings into the frozen mud. Disgraceful, he spat, his breath visible in the December air. Teaching girls arithmetic like they're merchants, filling boys' heads with poetry when they should be learning scripture. Lydia didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the 3 silver coins in her palm, her entire wages for 4 months of work. The Reverend's wife had counted them out one at a time, each coin hitting the wooden table like a small verdict. "You'll find no position in this territory," Pritchard continued, warming to his theme. "No God-fearing town wants a woman who thinks herself clever." The coins were cold enough to burn. Lydia closed her fist around them and finally looked back at the man who'd just ended her livelihood. He stood in the schoolhouse doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, absolutely certain of his righteousness. "Then I suppose I'll find a town that fears something else," she said. She regretted the words immediately. Smart remarks were a luxury she could no longer afford. But Pritchard's face had already purpled, and he slammed the door hard enough to rattle its frame. Lydia gathered her scattered belongings, 2 dresses, a coat with patches on the elbows, a single book of mathematics she'd bought with her first wages. Everything she owned in the world fit into a canvas bag that had seen better years. The town of Jessup, Montana Territory, had never been welcoming, but now it turned deliberately hostile. As she walked down the main street, shop owners found reasons to close their shutters. Mrs. Henderson, who'd smiled at her just yesterday, pulled her daughter inside and locked their door. The blacksmith actually spat in the dirt as she passed. News traveled faster than decency in small towns. Lydia made it to the edge of Jessup before she admitted the truth to herself. She had nowhere to go. The nearest town was 40 miles south through country that turned vicious in winter. She had 3 coins, a threadbare coat, and the kind of pride that kept you warm for exactly as long as it took to freeze to death. The sky had that peculiar yellow-gray color that promised snow. Not the gentle dusting that made everything picturesque, the kind that buried cattle and travelers with equal indifference. She stood at the fork in the road, south toward Billings or west into ranch country, and felt the first snowflakes land on her face. They stung like small accusations. You should have kept your mouth shut about the arithmetic. You should have taught what they wanted, not what the children needed. You should have been someone else entirely. The snow began falling in earnest. Within 10 minutes, Lydia couldn't see the road back to Jessup. Within 20, she couldn't feel her feet. She stumbled west because the wind pushed her that way, because standing still meant dying, because panic was setting in, and west was as good a direction as any to meet your end. The world became nothing but white and cold, and the increasingly distant idea that she used to be warm once. Her bag grew heavy. She dropped it. Her legs stopped obeying instructions. She fell twice, got up once. The second time she fell, she didn't get up. The snow felt almost soft. Lying down, she couldn't feel the wind as much. The coins in her pocket pressed against her hip. 3 small circles of silver that would be found with her body, if anyone found her body, if the spring thaw revealed anything recognizable at all. This is a stupid way to die, she thought with perfect clarity, over arithmetic and poetry. She might have died there if the horse hadn't nearly stepped on her. The animal shied sideways with a startled whinny. Lydia heard a man's voice, rough with surprise. "Christ Almighty!" Strong hands grabbed her shoulders and turned her over. She looked up into a face she couldn't quite focus on, dark beard, severe features, eyes that had seen too much weather. "Can you stand?" he demanded. Lydia tried to answer, but her jaw wouldn't work properly. She managed something between a nod and a shudder. He didn't wait for clarification. In one motion, he hauled her upright and half-dragged, half-carried her toward a horse that looked as disapproving as its rider. He threw her across the saddle like a sack of grain, not gently, but not cruel either, efficient. "Hold on," he said, mounting behind her. "We're 15 minutes from shelter if you don't die first." It was the least comforting thing anyone had ever said to her, but Lydia found herself obeying. She gripped the saddle horn with fingers that had gone white and numb, and tried not to vomit as the horse lurched into motion. The ride felt like falling through freezing water. Time stretched and compressed. She was aware of the man's arms on either side of her, steering the horse, keeping her from sliding off. She was aware of pain returning to her extremities, the awful burning of thawing flesh. She was aware distantly that she was making sounds that weren't quite words. "Almost there," the man said once. and that was the only kindness he offered. The ranch house materialized out of the white like something from a fever dream, low and solid, built to withstand exactly this kind of punishment from the weather. The man pulled the horse up to the porch, dismounted, and pulled Lydia down with the same efficient roughness he'd used to pick her up. The door opened before they reached it. A boy stood there, maybe 12, dark-haired, suspicious. "Found her on the western road," the man said by way of explanation. "Get the blankets, the good ones." The boy disappeared. The man guided Lydia inside, sat her in a chair near a stove that radiated blessed heat, and began unlacing her boots without asking permission. "These are frozen through," he said. "Were you trying to kill yourself or just stupid?" Lydia's jaw was starting to work again. "Lost," she managed. "Fired. From what?" He pulled off one boot, then the other, examining her feet with the clinical detachment of someone inspecting livestock. "No frostbite. You're luckier than you deserve." "School," Lydia said. "Teacher." The man looked up at her then, really looked at her, for the first time. His eyes were gray, the color of winter sky. "They fired a teacher? In this territory?" "Different ideas," Lydia said. "About education." "Different ideas." He almost smiled, but it died before reaching his mouth. "That's delicate." The boy returned with blankets, and another boy trailed behind him, younger, maybe 8, with the same dark hair and gray eyes. Both children stared at Lydia like she'd fallen from the moon. "Boys, this is—" The man paused. "I didn't get your name." "Lydia Mercer." "Caleb Vance. These are my sons, Thomas and Samuel." He wrapped one of the blankets around her shoulders. "Tom, get some coffee on. Sam, stop staring and bring the bread from breakfast." The boys moved to obey, but their eyes never quite left her. Lydia couldn't blame them. She probably looked half dead. She certainly felt it. "Thank you," she said to Caleb, "for not leaving me. Wasn't much choice." He stood, crossed to the window, looked out at the storm. "This is going to snow for 3 days at least. You wouldn't have made it another hour." 3 days. Lydia's mind, still sluggish with cold, tried to grapple with that. 3 days in a stranger's house. 3 days of charity she had no way to repay. "I have money," she said. "Not much, but—" "Don't need your money." Caleb turned from the window. "But if you're staying, you work. No passengers on this ranch." "Of course." Relief made her bold. "What do you need?" Caleb looked at her, really assessed her this time. Took in the threadbare coat, the schoolteacher posture, the hands that had never roped cattle or branded calves. "Can you actually cook?" he asked. "Not fancy, practical." "Yes." "Clean?" "Yes." "Handle children without falling apart?" Lydia glanced at the 2 boys who were pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. "I was managing 40 of them until this morning." Something flickered in Caleb's expression. Not quite amusement, maybe respect. "Then we'll figure it out for 3 days." Tom brought coffee in a tin cup that had seen better years. Lydia wrapped both hands around it and felt the warmth seep into her palms. The coffee was strong enough to dissolve nails, but she'd never tasted anything better. Sam approached with bread and what might have been butter, placed it on the table beside her with the careful ceremony of a child trying not to spook a wild animal. "Thank you, Samuel," Lydia said. The boy jumped. "Sam," he corrected softly. "Nobody calls me Samuel except when I'm in trouble." "Then Sam it is." She ate the bread slowly, feeling her body remember how to process food and warmth. The house revealed itself in pieces as her awareness expanded beyond mere survival. It was clean but stark, no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors, no softness anywhere. Functional. Male. Empty in ways that had nothing to do with available space. "How long have you been alone?" The question left her mouth before her brain could stop it. Caleb's back went rigid. Tom's face shuddered completely. Sam looked at the floor. 2 years, Caleb said finally. "Influenza." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry." He said it without heat, just fact. "Doesn't change anything." The storm howled outside and they all listened to it for a moment. The 4 of them in a house built for different people, different times. "The boys do their learning?" Lydia asked, changing the subject because the silence was becoming unbearable. "Reading and arithmetic," Caleb said. "What they need for ranching." "And what about what they need for living?" Caleb's eyes narrowed. Careful. You sound like a teacher with different ideas. I sound like someone who watched smart children get told they were only good for following orders. Maybe that's all most people are good for. Is that what you want for them? Lydia nodded toward the boys. Following orders? I want them alive, Caleb said flatly. Everything else is decoration. It should have been a conversation ender. It should have put her in her place. But Lydia had already lost everything that morning. Her job, her reputation, nearly her life. She had nothing left to lose except the truth. Alive isn't enough, she said. Not for them. Not for anyone. Caleb stared at her like she'd spoken in tongues. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides, got very close, and spoke in a voice that could have cut glass. You've been in my house for 20 minutes. You nearly died of stupidity an hour ago. You have no claim to opinions about my sons. You're right, Lydia said. I have no claim to anything, but I've been teaching children for 6 years, and I know what happens when you don't give them room to grow. They become small, hard, just trying to survive instead of trying to live. Like you? Caleb asked with deliberate cruelty. Lydia flinched. Yes, exactly like me. The honesty seemed to surprise him. He stepped back, the anger draining out of his posture. 3 days, he said again. Then the storm breaks, and you go wherever teachers with different ideas go. Understood. But as the afternoon bled into evening, as Lydia helped Tom prepare a simple dinner while Sam set the table with meticulous care, as Caleb worked on ranch accounts by lamplight and pretended not to watch her, something shifted in the air. The boys were starved for attention. Not food or shelter, Caleb provided that competently enough, but someone who asked them questions. Someone who listened to Sam's elaborate story about a calf born in autumn and didn't tell him to get to the point. Someone who noticed when Tom struggled with reading and offered help without making it seem like failure. You sound out the words, Lydia said gently, pointing to the page. Break them into pieces. I'm not stupid, Tom said, defensive. No one said you were, but reading doesn't come natural to everyone. Some of us have to work at it. You? Tom asked skeptically. Mathematics was easy, Lydia admitted. Reading was torture. My father used to say I read like a horse walks on ice, very careful and very slow. Sam giggled. Tom almost smiled. Caleb, from his position at the account, said nothing, but she felt his attention like heat from the stove. After dinner, beef stew that Lydia had managed not to ruin, Caleb sent the boys to bed. They went reluctantly, casting backward glances at this strange woman who'd appeared in their kitchen and made their father tense in ways they couldn't quite name. When they were gone, Caleb poured himself coffee and sat across from Lydia at the table. They're not used to women, he said. I gathered. Their mother... He paused, searching for words. She was soft with them, gentle. I'm not those things. They seem well cared for. That's not the same as what you're talking about, is it? Being alive versus living. Lydia wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup. No, it's not the same. What happened to you this morning? Caleb asked abruptly. The real story. So she told him. About teaching girls mathematics because they asked. About introducing poetry because the older boys were hungry for something beyond livestock prices. About Reverend Pritchard's increasing displeasure and his wife's open hostility, and the final confrontation over whether women should learn to cipher beyond counting household money. I told him that intelligence wasn't a sin, Lydia finished. He told me that pride was. And here we are. Stupid, Caleb said. Excuse me? Throwing away your position for pride. That was stupid. Lydia felt her temper rise. I didn't throw it away. I was dismissed for doing my job. Your job was teaching what the town wanted taught. You decided you knew better. I decided the children deserve better. And now those children have no teacher at all, Caleb pointed out. So what did your principals accomplish? It was a fair question, and Lydia hated him for asking it, because she'd been asking herself the same thing all day, and she still didn't have a good answer. I don't know, she admitted finally. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just made myself feel righteous while changing nothing. Caleb nodded slowly, as if this confession confirmed something he'd suspected. 3 days, he said again, but this time it sounded different. Less like a sentence, more like a negotiation. That night, Lydia slept in a small room that still smelled faintly of lavender, the late Mrs. Vance's touch, she assumed. The bed was narrow but clean, and the blankets were thick enough to hold back the cold and the memories of nearly freezing to death. She should have been grateful. She should have been planning her next move. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and wondered what happened to teachers with different ideas when the storm broke and they had nowhere left to go. The answer, she suspected, involved becoming very small and very hard, just trying to survive instead of trying to live. The storm did not break in 3 days. It snowed for 5 days straight, the kind of relentless weather that turned the Montana Territory into something prehistoric and merciless. The world shrank to the house, the barn, the desperate struggle to keep animals alive and pipes from freezing. Lydia worked. She cooked meals that wouldn't win prizes but filled stomachs. She cleaned a house that had been maintained but not cared for. She mended clothes with stitches that were competent if not beautiful. She kept the stove going, the coffee hot, the children occupied when Caleb needed to check on cattle or break ice from water troughs. And she taught, because she couldn't help herself. It started small. Sam struggling with arithmetic at the kitchen table. Lydia showing him a different way to think about division, not as breaking apart, but as fair sharing. If you have 12 apples and 4 people, she said, how do you make sure everyone gets the same? Sam's face lit up with understanding. 3 each. Exactly, that's division. You just didn't call it that. Tom, pretending to read by the stove, was listening. She knew because he'd been on the same page for 15 minutes. The next day, Tom asked about a word in the ranch accounts. Then another. By the 3rd day of the storm, both boys were bringing her questions, not just about reading and ciphering, but about everything. Why the sky looked yellow before snow. Whether the moon affected cattle the way it affected tides. If Montana would ever become a state. Caleb watched this transformation with an expression Lydia couldn't quite decipher. Not approval, not disapproval. Something more complicated. On the 5th night after the boys had gone to bed, he finally spoke. You're dangerous, he said. Lydia looked up from the sock she was darning. I beg your pardon? You make them curious. Curious people ask questions. Questions lead to dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction leads to leaving. He said it calmly, as if reciting a known fact. I can't afford to lose them to some notion of a bigger world. You can't afford to make them so small they resent you for it either. Better resentment than dead in some city thinking they're too good for ranching, Lydia set down the darning. Is that what you're afraid of? That they'll want more than this? This, Caleb said with sudden heat, is a working ranch that feeds people and provides livestock and matters in the world. It's not some shameful thing to escape from. I never said it was. You don't have to say it. I can hear it in how you talk to them. Like ranch work is something they'll graduate from if they just get smart enough. That's not... Lydia stopped, forced herself to think. That's not what I mean. But Caleb, what if Tom doesn't want to ranch? What if Sam has a gift for something else? Then they'll do it here, Caleb said stubbornly. There's room for all kinds of talents on a ranch. And if there isn't? The question hung between them like smoke. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered back. The storm's breaking tomorrow, Caleb said, changing the subject with all the subtlety of a barn door slamming. You'll be able to leave. To where? Lydia asked quietly. That's not my problem. No, she agreed. It's not. But neither of them moved. They sat there in the lamplight, 2 stubborn people who'd both learned the hard way that the world didn't care about your plans. I could stay, Lydia heard herself say, if you needed someone. Caleb's expression didn't change. As what? A housekeeper? As whatever you needed. Someone to manage the house, teach the boys, free you up for the ranch work. In exchange for what? Room and board? He shook his head. That's charity. I don't do charity. Then pay me, Lydia said. A proper wage. Can't afford a proper wage for a housekeeper. The word hung there between them. Housekeeper. Not quite the right term for what Lydia was proposing, but not quite wrong either. There's another option, Caleb said slowly, but you won't like it. Tell me anyway. He stood, walked to the window, spoke with his back to her. This ranch needs a woman. The boys need a mother. He paused. I need help. The practical kind, not the romantic kind. Lydia's heart began pounding. What exactly are you suggesting? Marriage, Caleb said bluntly. Legal, practical, a partnership for survival, nothing more. Nothing more? Lydia repeated. I'm not interested in romance, Miss Mercer. I'm not going to court you or pretend feelings I don't have. My wife died 2 years ago, and that part of me died with her. But I need someone competent running this household, and you need a place that won't ask questions about your teaching philosophies. He turned to face her. It's a business arrangement. You'd have security, respectability, a home. In exchange, you'd manage the house, teach the boys, and help me keep this place running. And the marriage part? Lydia asked carefully. On paper only, Caleb said. Separate rooms, separate lives, except where the ranch requires otherwise. You'd be Mrs. Vance in name because that's what propriety demands. Nothing more. It was the most unromantic proposal in the history of proposals. It was cold, practical, and completely honest. Lydia should have been insulted. She should have refused on principle. But she was looking at a man offering her survival without pretense, security, without false promises, and a chance to matter in a world that had just proved how dispensable she was. I'd want to keep teaching, she said. Not just the boys. Other children too, if parents allow it. As long as it doesn't interfere with running the house. And I'd want my own space, not charity, partnership. I just said that. Say it again, Lydia demanded. Because I need to hear that this isn't you being kind to a woman you found freezing. I need to know this is real. Caleb met her eyes. This is me being practical about survival. You're competent, educated, and desperate enough to consider it. I need help I can't afford to hire any other way. We're both getting exactly what we need and nothing we don't. That's as real as it gets. Lydia stood, crossed to where he stood by the window, held out her hand. Then we have a deal, Mr. Vance. He took her hand. His grip was firm, calloused, completely impersonal. We'll go to town when the road's clear, he said. Find a circuit judge. Make it legal. All right. They stood there for a moment, two people who'd just agreed to bind their lives together for reasons that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with mathematics. Two people trying to survive equaled better odds than one person trying to survive alone. It was the most rational decision Lydia had ever made. It felt nothing like victory and everything like surrender. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the wind finally start to die down, Lydia thought about the alternative. Walking into another town with 3 silver coins and a reputation for different ideas. Sleeping in boarding houses until the money ran out. Becoming smaller and harder until survival was the only thing she knew. This way, at least, she'd have a purpose. A place. Children to teach. It wasn't love. It wasn't even comfort. But it was a foundation. And maybe, in this brutal territory, that was enough. The judge's office smelled like old paper and older whiskey. Judge Crawford was a man who'd seen enough frontier marriages to know the difference between love matches and survival pacts, and he didn't waste time pretending this was the former. You understand this is permanent, he said, looking at Lydia over spectacles that had been repaired with wire. Montana territory recognizes divorce, but it's expensive, complicated, and generally more trouble than it's worth. I understand, Lydia said. Crawford shifted his attention to Caleb. And you're certain about this? You've known this woman for less than 2 weeks. I've known her long enough, Caleb said. The judge sighed, dipped his pen in ink, and began filling out the marriage certificate with the enthusiasm of a man documenting a livestock sale. Which, Lydia supposed, wasn't far from the truth of what they were doing. Tom and Sam sat on a bench against the wall, watching the proceedings with identical expressions of confusion. They'd been told about the marriage that morning, in the barn, while Caleb was checking on a horse with a bad foot. Miss Mercer is going to stay, Caleb had said, not looking at either of them. Permanently. We're getting married today. Tom's face had gone carefully blank. Sam had looked like he'd been struck. But you said, Sam started. I know what I said. Things change. Do we call her Mother? Tom asked, and there was something sharp in his voice that made Lydia's chest hurt. You call her Mrs. Vance, Caleb said, or Lydia, if she allows it. But this doesn't change anything about your actual mother. She's still who she was. It was possibly the worst way to explain a marriage to children, but Caleb delivered it with the same blunt efficiency he approached everything else, and the boys had absorbed it in silence. Now they sat watching a stranger become their legal stepmother, and Lydia wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Sign here, Crawford said, sliding the certificate toward her. Lydia signed her name, Lydia Ann Mercer, in the careful script her father had taught her. Beside her signature, Caleb scrawled his own name with the impatient hand of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "There," Crawford said. "Mr. and Mrs. Caleb Vance. May you find whatever it is you're looking for." It was the least inspiring benediction Lydia had ever heard, but it was done. She was married. She had a home. She would not freeze to death or fade into desperate poverty. She felt nothing except a strange hollowness where relief should have been. They spent the night in town. Caleb had business with the feed store, and the boys needed boots before winter set in completely. Lydia found herself in a mercantile, being measured for 2 new dresses by a woman who'd clearly heard about the hasty marriage and had opinions. 2 weeks, the seamstress muttered, pulling the measuring tape tight around Lydia's waist. "Practically indecent." "We're practical people," Lydia said evenly. "That's one word for it. The dresses would be ready in a month. Until then, Lydia would make do with what she had. She bought fabric for the boys. Their clothes were mended past the point of dignity, and thread, needles, buttons. Practical things. The kind of purchases a practical wife would make. At the boarding house that night, Caleb secured 2 rooms, one for himself, one for Lydia and the boys. It was awkward and obvious, and the proprietor's wife smiled with the particular smugness of someone who'd just had her worst assumptions confirmed. "Trouble in paradise already?" she asked sweetly. "Different rooms for propriety," Lydia said. "The boys are young." "Of course," the woman said, not believing a word. Later, when Sam was asleep and Tom was pretending to be, Lydia sat by the window and watched the town settle into darkness. Somewhere in the building, Caleb was doing the same. 2 people bound by law but separated by walls and intentions. This was the foundation she'd chosen. It didn't feel like much. The ride back to the ranch took most of the next day. The roads were still rough from the storm, and the temperature had dropped enough to turn mud into frozen ruts that jarred the wagon's wheels. Sam fell asleep against Lydia's shoulder. Tom sat rigid on the other side, maintaining careful distance. "You don't have to call me Mother," Lydia said quietly. "I'm not trying to replace her." Tom didn't look at her. "Good. Because you couldn't." "I know. Do you?" Now he did turn, and his eyes were older than 12 had any right to be. "Everyone keeps saying things are going to be better now, but they're just different. Different isn't better." "Sometimes different is just different," Lydia agreed, "and we all have to figure out how to live with it." "Pa says you're here to help." "I am." "We don't need help," Tom said. "We were fine." Lydia looked at this boy who was trying so hard to be a man, who'd been fine in the way that meant surviving, but not much else. She wanted to tell him that fine wasn't good enough, that he deserved more than just getting by, but he wasn't ready to hear it, and she wasn't sure she had the right to say it. "All right," she said instead. "Then I'm here anyway." It wasn't much of an olive branch, but Tom's shoulders relaxed slightly. He turned back to watching the road, and they finished the journey in silence. The ranch looked different now that it was officially hers. Or not hers. She had no legal claim to the property, marriage or not. Montana Territory had peculiar laws about women and ownership, but it was her home now, her responsibility, and that changed how she saw the worn fence posts and the barn that needed new shingles and the house that had been maintained but not loved. "I'll show you the stores," Caleb said, helping her down from the wagon. "What we have, what we need. You'll be managing the household accounts from now on." He said it matter-of-factly, but Lydia understood the significance. He was trusting her with money, with decisions, with the practical running of their lives. It was more than some husbands gave their wives. The stores were kept in a root cellar that smelled like earth and preservation. Caleb showed her the inventory with the same thoroughness he'd probably used to show a new ranch hand the cattle brands. Potatoes, carrots, onions, dried beans, salt pork, flour, sugar, coffee, lard. Enough to get through winter if they were careful. "We supplement with game," Caleb explained. "Deer, rabbit, sometimes elk if we're lucky. I keep chickens for eggs. There's a cow for milk. Everything else comes from town, and town is 2 hours in good weather." "How often do you go?" "Once a month, usually. More if there's need." Lydia ran her hand along the shelves, counting jars of preserves, calculating meals. It was the arithmetic of survival, and she'd always been good at mathematics. "We're short on sugar," she observed. "I don't use much." "The boys do, and we'll want to make preserves in summer." She pulled out a small notebook she'd bought in town. "I'll keep a list. What we use, what we need, make the town trips more efficient. Caleb watched her make notes with something that might have been approval. You really were a teacher. Still am, Lydia corrected, just with a smaller classroom now. That night she cooked her first meal as Mrs. Vance. It was nothing fancy, fried potatoes, salt pork, biscuits that came out slightly burned on the bottom. But it was hot and filling, and the boys ate without complaint. Thank you for dinner, Sam said carefully, as if he'd been coached. You're welcome. Tom said nothing, but he cleaned his plate and didn't argue when Lydia asked him to help wash dishes. Small victories. After the boys went to bed, Caleb pulled out the ranch accounts and spread them on the kitchen table. Numbers marched across the pages in neat columns. Cattle sold, feed purchased, wages paid to seasonal workers, taxes owed. You said you were good with figures, he said. I am. Then look at this and tell me where we stand. Lydia studied the accounts, her teacher's mind organizing the information into patterns. Income versus expenditure. Profit margins. Seasonal fluctuations. After 20 minutes, she had a picture. You're stable, she said. Not wealthy, but solid. The cattle operation is profitable. You're paying down debt from the influenza outbreak. Doctor's fees? Caleb nodded stiffly. That'll be cleared in another year at this rate. But you're vulnerable to bad seasons. One harsh winter, one disease outbreak, and you'd be in trouble. I know that. Do you have savings? Something set aside for emergencies? Some. How much? Caleb told her. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. We need to build that up, Lydia said. Cut expenses where we can. I can make our own soap, do more preserving, maybe sell eggs in town for extra income. This is a cattle ranch, not a farm. This is a business, Lydia corrected, and businesses need capital reserves. Unless you enjoy being one disaster away from losing everything. She said it more sharply than intended, but Caleb didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back and regarded her with those gray eyes that gave away nothing. You're going to be trouble, he said. I thought we established that already. Business arrangement trouble. The practical kind. He almost smiled. All right, you manage the household accounts. Show me the numbers once a month. If you can actually save money, I'll listen to more of your ideas. It was a test, and they both knew it. But Lydia had spent her entire teaching career being tested by men who assumed she'd fail, and she'd gotten good at proving them wrong. Deal, she said. The first week of marriage was an education in awkwardness. Lydia learned that Caleb woke before dawn and expected coffee immediately. That he hated waste. Every scrap of food had to be used or preserved. That he was quietest when he was angry, and anger usually meant something had gone wrong with the ranch. She learned that Tom was fiercely protective of his younger brother and deeply suspicious of anyone who tried to mother them. That Sam was hungry for affection but didn't know how to ask for it. That both boys had learned to be small and quiet around their father, not out of fear, but out of some misguided attempt to make his life easier. And she learned that a house without a woman's touch for 2 years developed its own peculiar order. Caleb had systems, rigid, efficient, completely impersonal. Meals at set times. Laundry on Mondays. Accounts on Friday nights. Everything scheduled, everything controlled. Lydia respected the order even as she began, carefully, to disrupt it. She started teaching the boys every afternoon, not formal lessons, Tom would have rebelled, but casual instruction folded into daily life. Reading while she cooked, having them calculate measurements while she sewed, asking questions about the world that made them think beyond the ranch's boundaries. Why does bread rise? She asked one afternoon, kneading dough while both boys watched. The yeast, Sam said promptly. But what is yeast doing? Silence. Then Tom ventured, eating? Exactly. It's a living thing. It eats sugar and produces gas, and the gas makes bubbles in the dough. That's why we need it, to distribute the bubbles evenly. That's disgusting, Sam said, delighted. That's science, Lydia corrected. Everything around you is science if you pay attention. Caleb, working on tack repair nearby, said nothing. But she felt him listening. The second week, neighbors started arriving. Martha Hendricks came first, ostensibly to welcome the new Mrs. Vance, but really to satisfy her curiosity. She was a weathered woman in her 50s who ran a neighboring ranch with her 2 adult sons. Quick marriage, she observed, accepting coffee. Practical one, Lydia replied. Those usually are. Martha studied her with sharp eyes. You know what people are saying? I can imagine. That he married you for free labor, that you married him for security, that it's all very calculated and cold. It is calculated and cold, Lydia said calmly. We're both getting exactly what we need. I don't see the shame in that. Martha blinked, then laughed, a short, surprised bark. Well, at least you're honest about it. Is there a point to being dishonest? Most people find one. Martha set down her coffee cup. I liked you better than I expected to. The boys look healthier already. Sam's got color in his face, and Tom's not wound quite so tight. That counts for something. They're good children. They're Caleb's children, which means they're stubborn and proud and too smart for their own good. Just like him. Martha stood. I've got 3 youngsters of my own, grandchildren, my son's kids. Would you be willing to teach them? I'd pay. Lydia's heart leapt. Teach them what? Reading, writing, arithmetic, the basics. Their mother died last year, and I'm not educated enough to do it proper. But they need learning if they're going to survive in this world. I'd be happy to, Lydia said. Bring them tomorrow afternoon. After Martha left, Caleb emerged from the barn where he'd been conspicuously absent during the visit. You're starting a school, he said. Just a few children. It won't interfere with the house. I didn't say it would. He leaned against the porch post. But don't be surprised when others start asking. Word travels fast out here. He was right. By the end of the week, Lydia had 6 students, the Hendricks grandchildren, a pair of brothers from a ranch to the south, and a girl whose father farmed a hardscrabble plot near the creek. They came in the afternoons, crowding into the main room of the house, bringing slate boards and eager faces. Lydia taught them the way she'd always taught, with questions instead of lectures, with curiosity instead of rote memorization. She made learning feel like discovery, and the children responded like flowers to sun. Tom watched from the periphery, pretending disinterest but listening to every word. Sam joined in enthusiastically, thrilled to have other children around. And Caleb said nothing, but he started scheduling his work so he'd be in the barn during lessons, where he could hear but not be seen. The 3rd week brought the first real test of the marriage. Lydia had been going through the household supplies and found several items in poor condition: blankets eaten by moths, tools rusted from improper storage, food containers that should have been replaced years ago. We need to make purchases, she told Caleb at dinner. What kind of purchases? She showed him the list. His face darkened. That's too much money. That's necessary maintenance. These things should have been replaced already. We've been getting by. Getting by isn't the same as doing things right, Lydia said, and immediately regretted the phrasing when she saw his expression harden. I've kept this ranch running for 2 years without help, he said quietly. The fact that it's not up to your standards doesn't mean I've been doing it wrong. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. He stood. You've been here 3 weeks, and suddenly everything I've done is inadequate. That's not fair. Fair? Caleb's voice rose slightly, the first time she'd heard him truly angry. You want to talk about fair? I brought you into this house, gave you security, and now you're telling me I don't know how to run my own ranch? The boys had gone very still. Sam's eyes were wide. Tom was watching his father with something that looked like vindication. See, I told you this wouldn't work. Lydia forced herself to speak calmly. I'm telling you that blankets with holes don't keep people warm, that rusted tools break at bad moments, that prevention is cheaper than repair. These aren't criticisms, they're facts. Facts from someone who's never run a ranch. Facts from someone who's run a household on poverty wages for 6 years. She met his anger with her own. I know about making things last, about stretching resources. But I also know when something is beyond saving, and half the items on this list are beyond saving. They stared at each other across the table. 2 stubborn people, both right, both refusing to concede. Finally, Caleb picked up the list. I'll look at it. That's all I'm asking. No, it's not. You're asking me to admit I've been doing things wrong. I'm asking you to trust that I know what I'm doing, Lydia said. The same way I'm trusting that you know how to run cattle. We both have expertise. That's supposed to be the advantage of this arrangement. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not agreement exactly, but a grudging acknowledgement that she had a point. I'll look at it, he repeated. But we're not replacing everything at once. Fine. We prioritize. Blankets first. Winter's not done with us yet. He nodded shortly and left the table. The boys exhaled in unison. You made Pa angry, Sam whispered. I disagreed with him, Lydia corrected. That's different. Nobody disagrees with Pa, Tom said. Then maybe someone should have started sooner. That night, lying in her small room, Lydia wondered if she'd pushed too hard. But the list was reasonable, and she was right about the waste. If they were going to survive as a partnership, Caleb needed to trust her judgment on household matters the way she trusted his on ranching. The next morning, she found 2 new blankets on her bed and a note in Caleb's rough handwriting. Start with these. We'll discuss the rest. It wasn't an apology. It was better. It was respect. Winter deepened and the ranch settled into rhythms that were almost comfortable. Lydia taught in the afternoons, managed the household in the mornings, and slowly began to understand the shape of the life she'd chosen. It wasn't warm. Caleb remained distant, polite, entirely self-contained. They worked together efficiently, discussed necessities, and maintained their separate bedrooms and separate inner lives. The marriage was exactly what they'd agreed to. Practical, functional, emotionally sterile. But something was growing anyway, despite their intentions. It started with small things. Caleb noticing that Lydia preferred her coffee with more sugar and preparing it that way without being asked. Lydia learning that he had nightmares sometimes and leaving a lamp burning in the kitchen so he wouldn't wake to complete darkness. Tiny accommodations, barely worth mentioning, but they accumulated like snow. The boys noticed. Sam started testing boundaries, sitting closer to Lydia during lessons, asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with school. Tom remained wary but stopped actively resisting. When she mended his favorite shirt with particular care, he actually thanked her. It's nice, he said awkwardly. Having someone who notices things. I notice everything, Lydia said. It's a teacher's curse. Ma used to say that too. The words came out before he could stop them, and Tom's face immediately closed down. I didn't mean... It's all right, Lydia said gently. You can talk about her. I'm not trying to erase her. Everyone acts like we should forget. That's because people are uncomfortable with grief. But forgetting someone doesn't honor them. Remembering does. Tom looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and went back to his work. But something had shifted between them. The 4th week brought unexpected guests. A wagon appeared on the eastern road, moving slowly through the snow. Caleb saw it first and went very still in a way that meant trouble. Who is it? Lydia asked. My brother. He said it with the same tone most people used for plague or fire. The wagon pulled up to the house, and 2 men climbed down, both bearing a strong resemblance to Caleb, but softer somehow, less weathered. The older one wore a suit that looked expensive even under road dust. Caleb, the suited man said with forced cheer, it's been too long. Not long enough, James. Caleb didn't move from the porch. What do you want? Can a man visit his brother? You can. You don't. Caleb's eyes shifted to the second man. Martin. The younger brother nodded but didn't speak. James noticed Lydia then, and his eyebrows rose. And who's this? You didn't mention you'd remarried. Didn't think it was your business. Of course it's my business. We're family. James approached the porch with the confidence of someone used to being welcomed. I'm James Vance, Caleb's older brother. This is our brother Martin. And you are? Lydia Vance, she said, offering her hand. Caleb's wife. James's handshake was too firm, held too long. Charmed. When did this happen? Recently, Caleb said. And you still haven't answered my question. What do you want? Can we at least come inside? It's freezing out here. Caleb looked like he wanted to refuse, but Lydia was already opening the door. Whatever was happening between these brothers, leaving them standing in the cold, would only make it worse. Inside, James surveyed the house with poorly concealed judgment. Still living rough, I see. It's a working ranch, Caleb said flatly. So you keep saying. James settled into a chair without being invited. How are my nephews? At school. You finally got them into a proper school? Thank heavens. I was beginning to think. They're here, Caleb interrupted. Lydia teaches them, and other children from neighboring ranches. James's gaze swung to Lydia with new interest. You're educated? I'm a teacher, Lydia said carefully. Fascinating. Where did you train? Back east. How wonderfully vague. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And how exactly did you meet my brother? I was traveling, Lydia said. We met during the storm. He offered shelter. And marriage? James's tone suggested he didn't believe a word. How romantic. How practical, Lydia corrected. We're well suited. Martin finally spoke, his voice quiet. Leave it alone, James. I'm just getting to know our new sister, James protested. Surely that's allowed. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Caleb stood by the window, radiating hostility. Martin looked uncomfortable, and James seemed to be enjoying himself immensely. Why are you really here? Caleb asked again. James's pleasant facade cracked slightly. There's an opportunity. Railroad expansion. They're looking to purchase land for a new route through this territory, and the compensation is generous. No. You haven't heard the offer. Don't need to. This ranch isn't for sale. Caleb, be reasonable. The money they're offering could set you up somewhere better, somewhere civilized. The boys could have real education, real opportunities. The boys have education, Caleb said, and they have opportunities here. This is their land, their legacy. This is dirt and cattle, James said, dropping the pretense of friendliness. You're being stubborn out of pride. I'm being stubborn because this ranch has been in our family for 30 years. Father built it. I'm not selling it to a railroad. Father's dead, Caleb, and his dreams don't have to be your prison. The words hung in the air like smoke. Caleb's hands curled into fists. Get out, he said quietly. I'm trying to help you. Get out of my house. James stood slowly. You're making a mistake. The railroad will get their route one way or another. Better to sell now, on good terms, than fight and lose everything. That a threat? It's reality. James pulled on his gloves. Think about it. For the boys' sake, if not your own. He left without another word, Martin following after a helpless glance at Caleb. They heard the wagon pull away, wheels crunching on frozen ground. Lydia waited for Caleb to say something. When he didn't, she asked, How much land do they need? This entire valley, probably. From the creek to the ridgeline, my ranch and 6 others. And if the other ranchers sell, then I'm surrounded by railroad interests, and they make my life difficult until I give up. Caleb turned from the window. But I'm not selling. This is the boys' inheritance. It's all they have left of their mother, of the family. I'm not trading that for railroad money. Even if the alternative is fighting, especially then. Lydia understood stubbornness. She'd been fired for it after all. But this felt different. This felt like Caleb was preparing for war. What can I do? She asked. He looked surprised. You'd help? We're partners, Lydia said. That was the arrangement. Your problems are my problems now. Something complicated crossed Caleb's face, gratitude mixed with wariness, as if he didn't quite know how to handle someone being on his side. Keep the boys safe, he said finally. Keep the household running. Let me handle the rest. It wasn't what Lydia wanted to hear. She wanted to be included, to help, to matter beyond cooking and cleaning. But she nodded because Caleb looked like he was barely holding himself together, and pushing now would only crack him further. That night, she heard him pacing in his room, back and forth, a caged animal trying to find a way out. She almost knocked on his door, almost offered comfort, but their arrangement didn't include comfort. It included practical support, household management, and appropriate distance. So Lydia stayed in her room and listened to Caleb wear out the floorboards, and wondered how long a marriage could survive on nothing but necessity and stubborn pride. The answer, she suspected, was exactly as long as both people refused to ask for anything more. The trouble started small, the way most disasters do. First, fence posts were found cut on the northern boundary, clean cuts that spoke of intent rather than weather damage. Caleb repaired them without comment, but Lydia noticed the tension in his shoulders when he came back to the house. Then cattle started disappearing. Not many. 3 head over 2 weeks. Enough to be noticed, not enough to be catastrophic. Could be rustlers, Martha Hendricks said when she brought her grandchildren for lessons. Been some activity near the ridge? Men nobody recognizes. Could be, Lydia agreed, watching Caleb through the window as he worked on yet another section of damaged fence. Or it could be pressure, Martha continued, lowering her voice. Railroad wants land, rancher won't sell. Suddenly the rancher has problems. tale as old as the territory. Lydia had heard the stories. Everyone had. Companies that wanted land and weren't particular about how they got it. Accidents that weren't accidents. Fires that started at convenient times. Livestock that wandered off or died mysteriously. "What are the other ranchers doing?" Lydia asked. Martha's face was grim. "Henderson sold last week, took the railroad's money and moved to Oregon. The Pratts are considering it. They've got daughters to marry off, and ranch life isn't producing suitable husbands. That leaves me, Caleb, and old Willem Corner, and Willem's half-blind and stubborn as a stone. So 3 ranches holding out. 3 ranches in the way." Martha gathered her grandchildren. "Tell Caleb to be careful. Men who want land bad enough don't stop at fence cutting." After they left, Lydia found Caleb in the barn, checking rifles. "Martha says the Hendersons sold," she said. "I know. And the Pratts are thinking about it." "I know that too." He didn't look up from his work, methodically cleaning each weapon with oil and cloth. "Doesn't change anything. It changes that you're more isolated, more vulnerable." "I've been vulnerable before." Lydia wanted to shake him. "This isn't the same as weathering a bad season or recovering from illness. These are people actively working against you. So I should just give up? Sell the land my father died building, that my wife is buried on, that my sons are supposed to inherit?" It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife directly since the marriage. The words came out raw, unfiltered. "I'm not saying give up," Lydia said carefully. "I'm saying acknowledge the danger. Prepare for it." "By doing what?" "I don't know yet, but pretending it's not happening won't make it go away." Caleb finally looked at her. His face was haggard in the lamplight, older than his years. "What do you want from me, Lydia?" "I want you to let me help." "You are helping. You're running the household, teaching the boys. I'm talking about this. The ranch. The threat. I'm not just decoration, Caleb. Use me." He set down the rifle. "How? You're a teacher, not a ranch hand." "I'm educated. I can read legal documents, write letters, make arguments that don't involve violence. If this is going to be a fight, you need more than guns and stubbornness." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled a stack of papers from his coat pocket and handed them to her. "Railroad lawyer sent these. I can't make sense of half the words." Lydia unfolded the documents and began reading. Legal language, dense and deliberate, outlining property claims and right-of-way easements and survey boundaries. But beneath the formality, the message was clear. The railroad was building a case for eminent domain. "They're saying the route through this valley serves the public good," she translated. "That individual property rights should yield to territorial development. Can they do that? Maybe. Probably. If they can prove the necessity and provide compensation." "I don't want compensation. I want my land." Lydia kept reading. There were surveys attached, maps showing proposed routes. The railroad was being clever, offering routes that required minimal land acquisition from large ranches while taking significant portions from smaller holdings. Caleb's ranch was the exception. They wanted nearly 40% of his acreage. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "The route shown here is inefficient. There's a better path through the eastern ridge that would cost less and take less land." "So why aren't they using it?" "Because someone wants this specific land, not for the railroad, for something else." Caleb leaned over her shoulder to look at the maps. What could they want? It's grazing land, some timber, nothing special. Lydia studied the survey more carefully. The proposed acquisition included the creek, the southern meadow, and a section of rocky hillside that was too steep for cattle. "Water rights?" she said suddenly. "The creek runs through your property and feeds into the Valley River. Control the creek. Control the water supply for every ranch downstream." "That's..." Caleb stopped. "That's exactly what they'd want." "Not the railroad," Lydia corrected. "Someone using the railroad as cover. This isn't about laying track, it's about controlling resources." The implications settled over them like frost. This wasn't a simple land grab. It was strategic, calculated, and far more dangerous than fence cutting. "We need to find out who's really behind this," Lydia said. "The railroad is just the mechanism. Someone local has to be coordinating." "My brother," Caleb said flatly. "James always wanted this land, thought it should have gone to him as the eldest. When father left it to me instead, he never forgave it." "Would he really go this far? For money and vindication?" Absolutely. Lydia folded the documents. Then we fight him with the same weapons he's using. Legal challenges, public pressure, documentation. I'm not a lawyer. No, but I can write. I can research. I can make a case. She met his eyes. Let me do this, Caleb. It's what I'm good at. He looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not just the school teacher he'd married out of convenience, but someone capable and fierce. All right, he said. We fight. The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity. Lydia wrote letters to the territorial legislature, to newspapers in Billings and Helena, to anyone who might care that ranchers were being systematically pressured off their land. She documented every incident, cut fences, missing cattle, strange riders spotted on the boundaries. She compiled water rights records and land surveys and historical ownership claims. And she taught the boys to be vigilant. If you see anyone you don't recognize on the property, you tell your father or me immediately, she instructed. Don't approach them. Don't engage. Just observe and report. Tom took this responsibility seriously, practically vibrating with importance. Sam looked worried. Are we in danger? He asked. Lydia chose her words carefully. We're being careful. That's different. But someone's trying to hurt Pa. Someone's trying to take the ranch. We're not going to let them. How? Sam's voice was very small. They're bigger than us. Lydia crouched down to his level. Size isn't everything. Sometimes being smart matters more than being big. And we're very smart. It seemed to help. Sam went back to his lessons with renewed focus, as if learning long division was his contribution to the fight. The community response to Lydia's letters was mixed. Some people wrote back with sympathy but no action. These things happen. Territory is rough. Good luck. Others were more encouraging. A lawyer in Helena offered pro bono consultation. A newspaper editor promised to investigate if Lydia could provide evidence. Evidence. That was the problem. They had incidents but no proof of coordination. Suspicions but no documentation. Everything could still be explained as bad luck or common rustling. Then Willem Coroner's barn burned down. The fire happened at night while the old rancher was asleep. He woke to his horses screaming and barely got them out before the whole structure collapsed. No injuries, but decades of equipment and stored feed were gone. Accident, the volunteer fire brigade from town declared. Lantern must have tipped over. But Willem swore he'd checked every lantern before bed, the way he'd done for 50 years without incident. They're escalating, Martha said grimly when she heard. Fence cutting didn't work. Rustling didn't work. Now they're destroying property. Has Willem decided to sell? Lydia asked. He's thinking about it. Man 73 years old, doesn't have the strength to rebuild at his age. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the progression of events, the deliberate pressure, the way someone was systematically removing obstacles. She got up and went to the kitchen, thinking coffee might help. Caleb was already there, sitting in the dark. Can't sleep either? She asked. Thinking. Lydia lit a lamp and sat across from him. About what comes next? About what I'd do if they came here. If they tried to burn this barn. His hands curled around an empty coffee cup. I'd kill them, Lydia. Without hesitation. I know. Does that bother you? Should it? Caleb looked at her with surprise. Most women would be horrified. Most women weren't raised on the frontier, Lydia said. My father shot a man once. Horse thief. Didn't kill him, but would have if necessary. He told me later that civilization is a luxury built on the willingness to defend what's yours. I never forgot that. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Caleb said, I'm sorry. For what? For bringing you into this. You signed up for a practical arrangement, a safe home. Instead, you're in the middle of a range war. I signed up to be your partner, Lydia corrected. Partners share the bad with the good. There hasn't been much good. There's been enough. And it was true, she realized. Despite the danger, despite the cold marriage and the suspicious community, there had been moments. Sam's laughter during lessons, Tom's grudging respect, the satisfaction of making the household accounts balance. Small victories, but real ones. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her voluntarily since their wedding day. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. Thank you, he said simply. Lydia squeezed his hand. We're going to win this. How can you be sure? Because we have to. Because your sons deserve this land. Because I didn't survive freezing to death in a marriage of convenience just to lose to railroad thugs. He almost smiled. That's not logic. That's stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. The attack came on a Tuesday night. Lydia was preparing dinner when she heard horses. Too many horses, moving too fast. She looked out the window and saw 5 riders approaching the house, faces covered with bandanas. Her heart stopped, then started again, faster. "Boys," she said calmly, "go to the cellar, now." Tom's face went white. "What's happening?" "Go, take your brother. Don't come up until your father or I come get you." "But now, Thomas." Something in her voice made him obey. He grabbed Sam and they disappeared down the cellar stairs. Lydia heard the bolt slide home. Caleb was in the barn, too far to reach in time. The riders stopped in the yard. One of them called out, "Vance, we need to talk." Lydia's mind raced. She could hide. She could wait for Caleb. No. Hiding meant looking weak. Waiting meant giving them time to do damage. She'd spent her whole life being told to be small, to be quiet, to let men handle things. She was done with that. Lydia went to the cabinet where Caleb kept the rifles. She'd watched him clean them enough times to know which one was loaded. She picked it up, checked the chamber the way he'd showed the boys, and walked to the door. Her hands were shaking. She forced them still. When she opened the door, all 5 riders turned to look at her. She saw surprise on the faces she could see. They'd been expecting Caleb, not a woman with a rifle. "My husband is busy," Lydia said, keeping her voice level. "You can talk to me." The lead rider laughed. "Put down the gun, lady, before you hurt yourself." "I grew up hunting with my father," Lydia lied smoothly. "I'm an excellent shot. Now state your business or leave." "Business is with Vance, not his wife." "I'm Mrs. Vance. That makes it my business, too." One of the other riders moved his horse closer. Lydia shifted the rifle toward him. "Stay where you are," she said. "You won't shoot," the man said. "You're bluffing." Maybe she was. The rifle felt impossibly heavy. She'd never shot at a person in her life. Her father had never even owned a gun. That story was complete fabrication. But these men didn't know that. "Test me," Lydia said. "See what happens." The lead rider's posture changed. He was reassessing, she realized, trying to decide if she was serious. From the barn, she heard the door open. Caleb appeared, his own rifle raised. 5 against 1, he observed. "Poor odds for you." 5 against 2, Lydia corrected, not taking her eyes off the riders. She felt Caleb's surprise even though she couldn't see him. Then he was beside her on the porch, rifle steady. "Leave," he said. "Now. We're here to deliver a message," the lead rider said. "The railroad's offer expires end of month. After that, things get harder." "Things are already hard," Caleb said. We're not interested." "Your neighbors were smart enough to take the deal." "My neighbors made their choice. I've made mine." The rider's horse danced sideways, restless. "You got a wife and kids to think about now, Vance. Maybe you should prioritize their safety." It was a threat, thinly veiled. Lydia felt rage bloom hot in her chest. "My safety is my concern," she said sharply. "And I'm perfectly safe here with my husband. What I'm not safe from is trespassers making threats on my property." "Your property?" The rider laughed. "Lady, this is your husband's—" "This is our property," Lydia interrupted. "Legally recognized by territorial law, and you're currently in violation of that law by refusing to leave when ordered." She had no idea if that was true, but it sounded authoritative, and that was what mattered. The riders exchanged glances. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. They'd come expecting intimidation to work. Instead, they'd found 2 armed people who wouldn't back down. "End of month," the lead rider repeated. "Think about it." They wheeled their horses and rode off, but slowly, not a retreat, just a tactical withdrawal. Lydia didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. Then her arm started shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Caleb took it from her gently. "You've never fired a gun in your life, have you?" he asked. "No? Your father didn't teach you to hunt?" "My father was a clerk. He could barely hunt his own shoes in the morning." Caleb stared at her. Then he started laughing, real laughter, the kind she'd never heard from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger. "You lied to armed men," he said, still laughing. "Completely fabricated a skill set." It worked, didn't it? It was insane. It was necessary. Lydia's legs felt weak. She sat down hard on the porch steps. Are they gone? For now. Caleb sat beside her. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Can it be both? He looked at her with something new in his expression. Not just respect, something warmer. I owe you, he said quietly. They could have killed you. They could have killed you too if I'd stayed inside like a proper wife. A proper wife wouldn't have confronted 5 armed men. Then I suppose it's good I'm not proper. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm glad you're here. Not just because it's practical, because you're you. It was the closest he'd come to sentiment since their marriage. Lydia didn't know what to do with it. We should check on the boys, she said, standing. They found Tom and Sam still in the cellar, huddled together in the dark. Sam was crying silently. Tom was trying very hard not to. It's all right, Lydia said, gathering them both. They're gone. You're safe. Who were they? Tom asked. Men trying to scare us, Caleb said. They failed. Because of her, Sam said, looking at Lydia with something like awe. We heard. She stood up to them. We both did, Lydia corrected. Your father and I together. But Sam wasn't listening. He'd wrapped his arms around her waist and was holding on like she might disappear. Tom stood apart, but his expression had changed. The suspicion was gone, replaced by something else. Thank you, he said awkwardly. For protecting us. That's what family does, Lydia said. Then, realizing what she'd said, she quickly added, that's what people do. For each other. But Tom had heard the first part. So had Caleb. That night, after the boys were asleep, and the doors were locked, and weapons were positioned at strategic points throughout the house, Caleb knocked on Lydia's door. Come in, she said. He entered, looking uncomfortable. I wanted to say again, you don't have to keep thanking me. I'm not thanking you. I'm apologizing. He sat on the edge of her bed, keeping careful distance. I've been treating you like hired help, like this was just a transaction. But you risked your life tonight, for me, for the boys, for this ranch. For us, Lydia corrected. This is my home too now. I'm not going to let someone take it without a fight. But you could have. You could have stayed inside, stayed safe, let me handle it. Instead you... He shook his head. I don't understand you. What's to understand? We made an agreement. I'm keeping it. This goes beyond any agreement. Does it? Lydia met his eyes. You offered me survival when I was dying. A home when I had nothing. Purpose when the world told me I was worthless. Did you think I wouldn't fight for that? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I think I've been wrong about a lot of things. Such as? What this marriage could be. What you could be. He stopped, struggled with words. I told you I wasn't interested in romance. That part of me was dead. I remember. I think I was lying to myself. Lydia's heart did something complicated in her chest. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know what we agreed to, but I thought you should know that what I feel for you has changed. You're not just convenient anymore. You're important. It was possibly the most inarticulate declaration of affection Lydia had ever heard. It was clumsy and honest and so completely Caleb that she felt something crack open in her chest. I never thought you were just convenient, she admitted. Even at the beginning, you were survival, yes, but you were also kindness when the world was cruel. You gave me value when I felt worthless. That meant something. Meant? Past tense? Means, Lydia corrected. Means something. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face with hesitant fingers. I don't know how to do this, he said. The courting, the romance, it's been years, and even then I wasn't good at it. We could figure it out together. I'm difficult, stubborn. I don't talk about feelings. I'm argumentative, prideful. I overthink everything. Sounds like we're well matched, Caleb said, and there was the ghost of a smile on his face. Sounds like we're a disaster waiting to happen. Maybe. He leaned closer. But we're already legally bound, so we might as well make the best of it. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, asking a question. Lydia answered by pulling him closer, by letting herself feel the warmth she'd been denying since the day they'd married. When they pulled apart, both of them looked surprised. That was, Caleb started. Unexpected, Lydia finished. Good unexpected? Very good unexpected. They sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then Caleb stood. I should go, he said. Let you sleep. You could stay. The words surprised them both. They'd agreed to separate rooms, separate lives, but things had changed. The foundation had shifted. Caleb looked at her with heat and hesitation in equal measure. Are you sure? Lydia wasn't sure of anything, but she was tired of being careful, tired of living in careful segments, tired of denying that this practical marriage had become something more. Stay, she said. So he did. The next morning, Lydia woke to find Caleb already up, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked. Nothing, just thinking. About? About how I got lucky finding you in that snowstorm. Lydia propped herself up on one elbow. You call finding a half-frozen teacher lucky? I call finding you lucky. He brushed hair from her face. Even if you can't actually shoot. I could learn. You should learn, especially now. The reminder of the threat crashed back over them. For a few hours, they'd forgotten about the railroad, the pressure, the danger. But morning brought reality with it. What's our next move? Lydia asked. I'm going to talk to Willem and Martha. See if we can present a united front. Maybe get the territorial marshal involved. And if that doesn't work? Caleb's face hardened. Then we prepare for the worst. They got dressed separately, maintaining some semblance of propriety even though everything had changed. When they emerged for breakfast, the boys were already at the table, and Tom looked at them with knowing eyes. You're different, he observed. Different how? Caleb asked carefully. Just different. Better, maybe. Tom shrugged, but there was approval in his expression. It's fine. Sam, oblivious to the undercurrents, just wanted to know if Lydia was teaching today. Of course, she said. Why wouldn't I? Because of the bad men. The bad men don't get to stop us from living, Lydia said firmly. We're going to keep teaching, keep working, keep being a family. That's how we win. It was a child's answer, simple and optimistic. But as Lydia looked around the table, at Caleb, at the boys, at the home they were building together, she believed it. They'd started as strangers bound by necessity. Now they were something more, a family forged by choice, strengthened by adversity. And they were going to fight like hell to keep it. The meeting at Willem Coroner's burned-out barn drew a smaller crowd than Lydia had hoped. Just the three remaining holdouts, Caleb, Willem, and Martha Hendricks, plus a handful of ranch hands who looked more interested in the free coffee than the conversation. Willem stood among the charred timber, looking older than his years. The fire had taken more than his barn. It had taken something from his spirit. I appreciate you all coming, he said, voice rough. But I've made my decision. I'm selling. Martha swore under her breath. Caleb's jaw tightened. They burned you out, Caleb said. You're going to reward them for it? I'm 73 years old. I don't have the fight left in me. Willem's hands shook as he gestured at the destruction. This was 50 years of work. Gone in one night. I can't rebuild. Even if I could, what's to stop them from doing it again? We stopped them, Caleb said. Together. How? You got a private army I don't know about? Willem shook his head. I'm tired, Caleb, and I'm scared. That's the truth of it. I'm scared they'll come back, and next time it won't be the barn. It'll be me. The admission hung in the cold air. Fear was contagious, Lydia thought. One person giving up made it easier for the next. What about you, Martha? Caleb asked. Martha Hendricks looked at her calloused hands. My boys want me to sell. Say the money's good, and we could buy better land elsewhere. Land without this kind of trouble. So you're considering it? I'm considering that I'm a widow with 2 sons and 3 grandchildren depending on me. If something happens to me, what do they have? She met Caleb's eyes. I've got more to lose than just land. We all do, Caleb said. That's why we fight. Or that's why we take the money and leave, Willem said. Not everything's worth dying for, Caleb. This is. Why? Because your father built it? Because your wife's buried here? Willem's voice gentled. Those are good reasons for you, but they're not good enough for me to risk dying in my sleep because someone decides to escalate from property damage to murder. Lydia had been quiet, watching the dynamics. Now she spoke. May I ask what the railroad's offering? Willem named a figure. It was substantial, enough to buy decent land elsewhere, to rebuild, to start over with capital to spare. And they're guaranteeing safe passage, moving costs? Lydia asked. All covered. Convenient, almost like they planned for resistance and budgeted accordingly. She looked at Martha. What about your offer? Martha named a similar amount. Lydia did quick calculations in her head. They're overpaying, she said, significantly. Market value for grazing land in this territory is maybe 60% of what they're offering. So they really want us gone, Martha said. Or they really need something you have. Lydia pulled out the maps she'd been studying. Look at the water rights. Your 3 properties control every major water source in this valley. The creek, the river junction, the spring wells. Without access to those, any railroad operation here becomes exponentially more expensive. Willem frowned. But the railroad just needs a route. Why do they care about water? Because it's not just about the railroad, Caleb said, understanding dawning. Someone's planning to develop this valley, ranching, farming, maybe even a town, and they need water rights to make it work. Which means the land itself is worth far more than they're admitting, Lydia continued. They're buying you out cheap before you realize what you actually own. Martha's expression sharpened. How much more? I'd need to verify, but if they're planning development, triple, maybe quadruple the offer. Especially your property, Martha. You've got the river junction. That's worth a fortune to the right buyer. So we hold out and demand more money? Willem asked. Or we hold out and develop it ourselves, Lydia said. Pool resources, create our own water cooperative, lease rights to the railroad at our price, not theirs. It was ambitious, possibly insane, but she watched the idea take root in their faces. That would take capital, Martha said slowly, and organization. And lawyers, Willem added. I can handle the organization and research, Lydia said. We'd need to hire legal counsel, but if we're actually worth what I think we are, we could find investors interested in backing us. Or the railroad just burns us all out, Willem said. Don't pretend that's not a possibility. It's absolutely a possibility, Lydia agreed. But right now they're using intimidation because it's cheaper and cleaner than violence. The moment you sell, that equation changes for Martha and Caleb. Suddenly 2 properties are easier targets than 3. And if Martha sells, Caleb's completely isolated. The logic was brutal but sound. They were safer together than apart. Caleb had been watching Lydia with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe, or concern. Probably both. This is a big risk, he said. All of us tied together financially. If it fails, we're no worse off than we are now, Lydia interrupted. Except we'll have tried. We'll have fought smart instead of just fighting hard. I don't know, Willem said. I'm too old for this kind of gamble. You're too old to run, Martha corrected sharply. Where are you going to go, Willem? Some boarding house in Oregon where nobody knows your name? Where you're just another old man waiting to die? Better than being a dead old man in Montana. Maybe, but not better than being the old man who stood his ground and won. Willem looked at Martha for a long moment, then at Caleb, then at Lydia, the schoolteacher who'd somehow become the architect of their resistance. You really think this could work? He asked her. I think it's worth trying, Lydia said. I think giving up because you're scared is a slow death anyway. At least this way you're living until the end. It was harsh, but Willem nodded slowly, something rekindling in his weathered face. All right, he said. I'm in. But if I die because of this, I'm haunting all of you. Martha laughed, sharp and relieved. Deal. They spent the next 2 hours working out details. Lydia took notes, sketching a framework for what they were attempting. A cooperative water management agreement, shared legal defense, pooled resources for security. It was rough, full of gaps and questions, but it was something. We need to move fast, Caleb said. The railroad's deadline is end of month. That gives us less than 2 weeks. Then we work fast, Lydia said. I'll draft the cooperative agreement tonight. Tomorrow, Caleb and I ride to Helena to find a lawyer willing to take this on. Helena's 2 days there and back, Caleb said. That's a long time to leave the ranch undefended. I'll stay here, Martha volunteered. Bring my boys. We'll keep watch. Willem nodded. I'll come too. Least I can do since you're all trying to save my stubborn hide. It was settled. Lydia felt something like hope stirring, fragile but real. The ride to Helena was brutal. Spring was coming, but winter still held the high country in its grip. They traveled through snow and mud, camping one night in conditions that would have killed Lydia 3 months ago. But she'd learned things since then. How to make a fire in wet conditions. How to sleep cold without panicking. How to keep going when her body wanted to quit. Caleb watched her work with quiet approval. You're tougher than you look, he said, feeding sticks to their fire. I've had good teachers. I didn't teach you this. You taught me that survival is a skill like any other. You just have to practice it enough. They sat close to the fire, sharing warmth. The night sounds of the territory surrounded them. Wind, distant animal calls, the snap of burning wood. Are you scared? Caleb asked quietly. Terrified, Lydia admitted, but being scared hasn't stopped me yet. What if this doesn't work? What if we lose everything? Then we lose everything fighting instead of everything surrendering. She looked at him in the firelight. Wouldn't you rather that? Yes, but I'm not just thinking about me anymore. I'm thinking about you, the boys, everyone who's trusting us. So we don't fail, Lydia said simply. That easy? That necessary. Caleb pulled her closer, and they sat together watching the fire burn down to coals. Tomorrow would bring Helena, lawyers, and complications. Tonight there was just this, 2 people choosing each other and choosing to fight. Helena was bigger than Lydia expected. A territorial capital bustling with miners, merchants, and men in suits who looked like they made money from other people's labor. They found the lawyer Martha had recommended, a woman named Catherine Reeves, who had a reputation for taking difficult cases. Her office was small but organized, shelves crammed with law books and case files. She listened to their story without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. When they finished, she set down her pen. You understand this is complicated, she said. Water rights law in the territory is evolving. There's precedent, but it's inconsistent. And if the railroad has eminent domain claims— They don't, Lydia interrupted. Not legitimate ones. I've reviewed the surveys. Their proposed route is inefficient. They're claiming public necessity, but it's fabricated. Catherine raised an eyebrow. You've reviewed the surveys? I was a teacher. I know how to research. Apparently. Catherine pulled out her own maps. Show me. Lydia spread out the documents she'd brought, explaining the discrepancies. The inefficient routing, the overreach on land acquisition, the focus on water sources rather than optimal rail paths. Catherine studied everything carefully. Then she smiled, small but genuine. This is good work, she said. Very good work. You've essentially built half my case already. So you'll take it? Caleb asked. I'll take it, but I'm expensive, and this will be a fight. The railroad has deep pockets and political connections. How expensive? Caleb asked. Catherine named her fee. It was substantial but not impossible, if the 3 ranches pooled resources. We can manage that, Lydia said. If you can win. I can't promise victory, but I can promise I'll make them work for it. Catherine began drafting notes. I'll need depositions from all 3 ranchers, documentation of every incident, the fence cutting, the rustling, the barn fire, anything that establishes a pattern of intimidation. We have that, Lydia said, producing her meticulously kept records. Catherine looked impressed. You really are a teacher. I really am thorough. They spent the next several hours going over details, building strategy. Catherine would file injunctions to delay any eminent domain proceedings. She'd challenge the survey data. She'd request public hearings to expose the railroad's actual intentions. This will get ugly, she warned. They'll attack your credibility. They'll dig into your past. They'll look for any weakness to exploit. Let them look, Caleb said. We've got nothing to hide. But Lydia felt a chill. She had things to hide. Her dismissal from the school, the circumstances of her marriage, her complete lack of qualifications for what she was attempting. Catherine noticed her expression. What is it? I was fired from my teaching position, Lydia said, for insubordination, for having different ideas about education. And they'll use that. They'll say I'm not credible, that I'm just a troublemaker. Catherine shrugged. Probably. But being fired for principles isn't the scandal they'll hope it is, especially not out here. Half the people in Helena were run out of somewhere else for having opinions. She looked at Lydia directly. The question is, can you stand behind what you did? Can you defend it publicly? Yes, Lydia said without hesitation. Then we'll make it a strength, not a weakness. Show you're someone who stands up for what's right, even at personal cost. That plays well with territorial judges. They left Helena with a lawyer, a strategy, and renewed determination. The ride back felt shorter, maybe because they had direction now, purpose beyond just surviving. You were impressive in there, Caleb said as they made camp the second night. I was terrified. You hit it well, Lydia smiled. Another survival skill. Lydia, Caleb's voice was serious. If this goes wrong, they come after us harder. I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll take the boys and leave. Get somewhere safe. Don't try to be brave. Absolutely not. Lydia, no. We're in this together, Caleb. That was the deal. For better or worse, remember? That was before He stopped, struggled with words. Before this mattered so much. Lydia understood what he wasn't saying. Before I loved you. Before I couldn't imagine losing you. It mattered from the beginning, she said softly. We just didn't admit it. He kissed her then, urgent and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the moment. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. When this is over, Caleb said, when we've won or lost or figured out whatever comes next, I want to do this properly. Do what properly? Court you, take you to dinner in town, buy you something nice. All the things I should have done before marrying you. Lydia laughed. We're already married. I know. But you deserve better than a practical arrangement that turned into something more by accident. It wasn't an accident, Lydia said. It was two stubborn people refusing to quit until they found something worth keeping. They arrived back at the ranch to find it transformed into a fortress. Martha's sons had reinforced the barn doors and installed additional locks. Willem had positioned himself in the loft with a rifle and a clear sight line to the main approach. Martha herself was teaching the boys to reload weapons. Welcome back, she said cheerfully. We've been busy. I can see that, Caleb said. Any trouble? Riders came by yesterday. Same ones who threatened you, probably. We fired a warning shot. They left. You fired at them? Near them, Martha corrected. Important distinction. Made our point without giving them cause to claim we attacked first. Lydia felt a surge of affection for this tough, practical woman. Thank you for staying. Wasn't charity, my ranch is next if yours falls. Martha gathered her grandchildren. You get that lawyer? We did. Catherine Reeves. Reeves? Martha grinned. That woman's a fighter. Railroad's going to hate her. That's the idea. Over dinner, a communal affair with too many people crammed into the kitchen, they shared what they'd learned in Helena, Catherine's strategy, the timeline, the risks. Willem listened carefully, then asked the question they'd all been avoiding. What if they don't wait for the legal process? What if they just come and take what they want by force? Then we defend it, Caleb said simply. 5 ranchers and some ranch hands against however many men the railroad can hire? Willem shook his head. Those aren't good odds. They're the odds we have, Martha said, unless you want to quit now. I'm not quitting. I'm being realistic. Realistic is we're committed, Lydia said. We've hired a lawyer. We've made a plan. We've drawn our line. Now we see it through. The room fell quiet. Then Tom spoke up, surprising everyone. I'll fight too, he said. I can shoot. I can help. No, Caleb said immediately. Why not? It's my land too, my future. Because you're 12 years old. So? I'm big enough to hold a rifle, and I'm a better shot than half the hands. It was true. Tom had been practicing with Caleb since he was 8, but the idea of him in actual danger made Lydia's chest tight. Your father's right, she said. This isn't your fight yet, fight. It will be eventually, Tom argued. If we lose, what future do I have anyway? Better to fight for it than watch you all fail because you were too busy protecting me. The logic was sound, even if Lydia hated it. Caleb looked torn between pride and fear. We'll discuss it, he said finally, but not now. After everyone had left or gone to bed, Lydia found Caleb in the barn, checking on the horses but really just avoiding sleep. "You're worried about Tom," she said. "I'm worried about all of it." He didn't turn around. "I'm worried we're leading everyone into disaster, that my stubbornness is going to get good people hurt." "This isn't just your stubbornness. We all chose this. Because I wouldn't compromise." "Would you rather have compromised, sold out, and moved on?" "No. But I'd rather not have Tom talking about fighting. He's still a child." "He's a child in a hard place," Lydia said. "This territory doesn't give children the luxury of staying children. You know that." Caleb finally turned to face her. "I don't want him to have to learn what I learned. How to hurt people. How to choose between what's right and what's safe." "Then we win," Lydia said. "We win this fight, and he doesn't have to make those choices yet. And if we don't win, then we still showed him something worth fighting for. That matters too." Caleb pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "When did you become the optimist?" "When I married a stubborn rancher who wouldn't quit even when quitting made sense." They stood there together in the quiet barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, and let themselves have this moment of peace, because tomorrow the real fight would begin. The railroad's response to Catherine Reeves's injunction arrived by courier 3 days later. It was aggressive, accusatory, and exactly what Lydia had expected. They called the rancher's claims frivolous. They questioned Catherine's motives. They demanded immediate access to begin survey work. Catherine's reply was surgical. She cited precedent. She quoted territorial statutes. She made it clear that any attempt to begin work before the legal proceedings concluded would result in additional lawsuits and criminal charges for trespassing. The railroad didn't like it. Within a week, the pressure escalated. More cattle disappeared. Fences were cut systematically. Supplies ordered from town mysteriously never arrived. The general store suddenly claimed they couldn't extend credit to any of the 3 ranches. "Economic warfare," Martha said grimly. "They're trying to starve us out without direct violence." "It's working," Willem admitted. "I'm down to 3 weeks of feed for my stock. After that, I start losing animals." "We share," Lydia said. "Pool our resources. What one ranch has, we all have." It was easier said than done. Coordinating supplies across 3 properties required organization, trust, and constant communication. Lydia took charge, creating schedules and inventory systems, making sure nothing was wasted. She was exhausted. She was teaching during the day, managing the household at night, and spending every spare moment on legal research and coordinating the cooperative. She lost weight. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. "You need to rest," Caleb said one night, finding her still awake at midnight, working on supply calculations. "I need to finish this." "It can wait until morning. Morning, I'm teaching. Afternoon, I'm coordinating with Martha. Evening, I'm managing this household." Lydia rubbed her eyes. "There's no extra time." "Then make time. You're going to collapse." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running yourself into the ground." "So are you," Lydia snapped. "I don't see you sleeping." "That's different." "Why? Because you're the man? Because this is your fight and I'm just helping?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Caleb?" Lydia stood, anger and exhaustion making her reckless. "Because I'm tired of everyone acting like I'm some fragile thing that needs protection. I stood up to armed men. I'm holding this cooperative together. I'm doing the work. Stop treating me like I'm going to break." Caleb stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "What?" Lydia demanded. "Lydia, you're right. I'm sorry." He crossed to her, took the papers from her hands, set them aside. "You're not fragile. You're the strongest person I know. But even strong people need rest." The fight drained out of Lydia as quickly as it had come. She was so tired. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted. "If I stop, I'll think about everything that could go wrong, all the ways we could fail." "Then don't stop. Just slow down. Let me help more." "You're already doing everything. Then we both do less. We trust that what we've done is enough." He guided her toward the bedroom. "Tonight we sleep. Tomorrow we keep fighting. But tonight we rest." Lydia let herself be led. Let herself collapse into bed fully dressed. Let Caleb pull a blanket over her and settle beside her. "What if it's not enough?" she whispered. "What if we lose anyway?" "Then we lose knowing we did everything we could," Caleb said. but I don't think we're going to lose. I think we're going to surprise everyone, including ourselves." Lydia wanted to believe him. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion take her, Caleb's warmth solid beside her, and tried not to think about the deadline approaching like a storm on the horizon. They had 1 week left. The attack came 3 days before the deadline, at dawn when the light was still gray and uncertain. Lydia woke to the sound of breaking glass and Caleb already moving, pulling on boots, grabbing his rifle. She didn't waste time asking questions. She threw on her dress and ran to the boys' room. "Get to the cellar," she ordered. "Now!" Tom was already awake, eyes wide. "How many?" "I don't know. Move." But Tom didn't move toward the cellar. He moved toward the cabinet where the rifles were kept. "Thomas Vance, you get to that cellar right now," Lydia said. "No." Tom's voice was steady. "You need every gun you can get." There was no time to argue. Another window shattered. Lydia heard shouting outside, the whinny of horses. "Fine, but you stay inside. You shoot from the windows, not the door. Understand?" Tom nodded and took position. Sam was crying, and Lydia pulled him into a fierce hug. "Go to the cellar, baby. Lock the door. Don't come out until one of us gets you." "I'm scared," Sam whispered. "I know. Be scared in the cellar, where it's safe." She waited until she heard the bolt slide, then grabbed her own rifle, the one Caleb had been teaching her to actually use over the past weeks, and moved to the front window. Outside, she counted 8 riders. They weren't bothering with bandanas this time. They wanted to be seen. Caleb was already on the porch, rifle raised. "Get off my property!" The lead rider laughed. "We're here on railroad business, official survey work." "At dawn? With guns?" "Territory's dangerous. We're protecting ourselves." "From what?" "From ranchers who don't know when to quit." Caleb fired a warning shot over their heads. The riders scattered, taking cover behind their horses and the fence posts. "That's assault!" the leader yelled. "That's a warning!" Caleb shouted back. "Next one's not!" Lydia heard movement from the barn. Martha and her sons had been sleeping there, standing watch. They emerged armed, flanking Caleb's position. 8 against 4, the leader called. "Poor odds, Vance." 8 against 5, Tom said loudly from the window, showing his rifle. "Against 6, came Willem's voice from the barn loft. "And I got a clear shot at every one of you from up here." The riders hesitated. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. They'd expected easy intimidation, not organized resistance. "We can do this the hard way," the leader said, "but it'll go worse for you." "It's already going worse for you," Martha called. "You're trespassing. We've got witnesses, and every shot you fire is another charge at your trial." "What trial?" "The one that starts when the territorial marshal arrives," Catherine Reeves said, emerging from behind the barn with a badge-wearing man beside her. "Which would be now?" The marshal was a weathered man named Hawkins, who looked like he'd seen every kind of trouble the territory could produce. He surveyed the scene with the weary patience of someone who was tired of this particular fight. "Anyone hurt?" he asked. "Not yet," Caleb said. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Hawkins turned to the riders. "You boys with the railroad?" "We're surveyors," the leader said. "These ranchers attacked us." "That's so?" "Because it looks to me like you're on private property at dawn with weapons, and they're defending their home." Hawkins pulled out a notebook. "I'm going to need names. All of you." The riders exchanged glances. Giving names meant being identified, which meant facing consequences. "We don't have to tell you anything," one of them said. "Actually, you do. I'm a territorial marshal, and you're engaged in suspected criminal activity. You can give me names, or I can arrest all of you and sort it out at the courthouse." Hawkins smiled without humor. "Your choice." The standoff lasted another tense minute. Then the leader spat in the dirt and gave his name. The others followed, reluctant but cornered. Hawkins wrote everything down carefully. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to report back to whoever hired you that this property is under marshal protection pending legal proceedings. And if I see any of you near any of these 3 ranches again, I'm arresting you on sight. Clear?" "You can't protect them forever," the leader said. "Don't have to. Just have to protect them long enough for the courts to do their job." Hawkins jerked his head toward the road. "Get moving." The riders left, slowly and with clear resentment. But they left. When they were gone, Caleb lowered his rifle and let out a breath he'd been holding. That was too close, he said. That was perfect timing, Catherine corrected. She looked tired but triumphant. I convinced Marshal Hawkins to accompany me based on the pattern of incidents. He agreed this was escalating toward violence and warranted official presence. How long can you stay? Martha asked Hawkins. Week, maybe. Got other territories to cover, but I can deputize some of you if needed. Make it official. Do it, Caleb said immediately. We need every legal advantage we can get. The next hour was spent making statements, documenting the incident, and getting official deputy badges for Caleb, Martha's eldest son, and Willem. It wasn't much, but it was something. Legal authority to defend their property. Tom emerged from the house looking shaken but trying to hide it. Caleb pulled him aside. You did good, he said quietly. But don't do it again. You needed me. I know. And I'm proud of you. But I'm also terrified, and I need you to understand that being brave doesn't mean not being scared for the people you love. Tom nodded slowly. Were you scared? Absolutely. But you didn't show it. That's not the same as not feeling it. Caleb gripped his son's shoulder. Being a man isn't about hiding fear. It's about doing what's necessary despite being afraid. You did that today, but I need you to let the adults handle it from here. Can you do that? Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but he finally nodded. Yes, sir. After everyone dispersed, Hawkins to make camp in the barn, Catherine to review legal documents, Martha and Willem to check on their own properties, Lydia went to retrieve Sam from the cellar. She found him huddled in the dark, tear-streaked and trembling. It's over, sweetheart, she said, gathering him up. We're all safe. I heard gunshots. Just warning shots. Nobody got hurt. What if they come back? Then we'll handle it again. Lydia carried him upstairs, got him settled in bed even though it was full morning now. But right now, you're safe. We're all safe. Sam clung to her. I don't want to lose you, or Pa, or Tom. You're not going to lose us. Ma died. People die. Lydia's chest hurt. This 8-year-old child had already learned that safety was temporary, that the people you loved could disappear. You're right, she said carefully. People do die, and I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise that we're fighting as hard as we can to make sure everyone stays safe, and that we love you more than anything. Even though you're not really my ma? The question was small, uncertain. Lydia brushed hair from his forehead. I am really your ma, she said. Maybe not the one who gave birth to you, but the one who's here now. The one who wants to keep you safe and see you grow up and watch you become whoever you're meant to be. That's real too. Sam thought about this. Then he said, I'm glad Pa found you in the snow. Me too, baby. Me too. She stayed with him until he fell asleep, then went to find Caleb. He was in the barn with Hawkins, going over security arrangements. We need to talk about next steps, Hawkins was saying. This was a warning. They're testing your defenses. Next time, they'll come harder. Let them come, Caleb said. Caleb, Lydia started. No, I'm done being defensive. They want a fight? We'll give them one. That's exactly what they want, Hawkins said. You attack first. You lose the moral high ground. You lose public sympathy. You make their case for them. So we just wait for them to burn us out like they did Willem? You defend, you document, and you trust the legal process, Catherine said, joining them. Which brings me to news. The territorial judge has agreed to expedited hearings. We're in court in 5 days. 5 days. Less than a week to make their case, to prove the railroad's intentions were corrupt, to save everything they'd been fighting for. What are our chances? Caleb asked. Honestly? 50-50. We have good evidence of intimidation. We have the survey discrepancies. We have testimony from multiple ranchers. But the railroad has money and influence. Catherine looked at each of them. This is going to come down to who tells a more compelling story. Then we tell ours, Lydia said. The truth. 3 families trying to keep their land against a corporation that wants it for profit. Simple stories work, Catherine agreed. But we need to be prepared for their attacks. They'll question your credibility, your marriage, Lydia. They'll use it. They'll call it suspicious, opportunistic. It was opportunistic, Lydia said. We both needed something. That doesn't make it illegitimate. No, but it makes it complicated to explain, and they'll exploit complications. The next 5 days were a blur of preparation. Catherine drilled them on testimony. What to say, what not to say, how to stay calm under hostile questioning. Hawkins maintained watch, discouraging any further incidents, and Lydia kept the household functioning, teaching lessons, managing supplies, holding everything together while trying not to think about what failure would mean. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She found Caleb on the porch, staring at the dark expanse of his land. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, without turning. Lydia joined him. "It is. My father used to stand here every night, said it reminded him why he worked so hard, why it mattered." Caleb's voice was rough. "If we lose tomorrow, all of that work means nothing. It means something regardless. It means he built something worth fighting for." "But will it be enough?" Lydia didn't have an answer, so she just took his hand and stood with him, watching the stars, and tried to memorize this moment, this place, this life they'd built from nothing. "Whatever happens," Caleb said quietly, "I want you to know you changed everything. I was just surviving before you, going through motions. You made me want to live again. You did the same for me, did I? Because from where I'm standing, you saved yourself. I just provided the location." Lydia smiled. "We saved each other. That's how partnerships work." They stood together until the cold drove them inside, then lay awake together until dawn, not talking, just being present, together. The courthouse in Helena was packed. Word had spread about the case, small ranchers against railroad interests, and people were curious. Some sympathetic, some hostile, most just wanting to see how it played out. James Vance was there, sitting with the railroad lawyers. He didn't look at Caleb. The judge was a severe woman named Harrison, who'd been adjudicating territorial disputes for 20 years. She had a reputation for fairness and absolutely no patience for theatrics. "Let's be clear," she said at the opening. "This is about property rights and survey legitimacy, not emotions, not family drama, facts and law. We clear?" Both sides agreed. The railroad went first. Their lawyer was smooth, presenting the case as simple progress. The territory needed development. The railroad route was carefully planned to maximize efficiency while minimizing impact. The holdout ranchers were being unreasonable, rejecting generous offers, impeding territorial growth. "These ranchers are standing in the way of progress that would benefit thousands," he argued. "Individual property rights must sometimes yield to the greater good." Then he attacked. He questioned the cooperative agreement as hastily assembled and legally questionable. He suggested the ranchers were exaggerating the intimidation incidents for sympathy, and he focused on Lydia. "Mrs. Vance," he said with false politeness, "you married Mr. Vance less than 3 months ago, is that correct?" "Yes." "After knowing him for how long?" 2 weeks. Murmurs from the gallery. The lawyer smiled. 2 weeks, and you're now the driving force behind this legal challenge. Quite a rapid transformation from school teacher to legal strategist. "I'm educated. I can read. I can research." "Those skills transfer. Or perhaps you're simply desperate to maintain the security you married into." Catherine objected. Judge Harrison sustained it. But the damage was done. The suggestion planted that Lydia was self-serving, that this was about her security rather than justice. When it was their turn, Catherine built the case methodically. She presented the survey discrepancies, the pattern of escalating incidents, the evidence that the railroad's route was inefficient and focused on water rights rather than optimal rail placement. Then she put Lydia on the stand. "Mrs. Vance, tell the court about your background." Lydia took a breath. "I was a teacher. I was fired for teaching subjects my employer felt were inappropriate for my students." "What subjects? Advanced mathematics for girls? Poetry for boys? Critical thinking across the curriculum. And you consider this principled?" "I consider it educational. Children deserve to learn, not just memorize. When my employer disagreed, I stood by my principles. It cost me my job and nearly my life." "How so?" "I was dismissed in winter with minimal wages. I nearly froze to death before Mr. Vance found me. He offered practical help, shelter in exchange for household management. We married because it made sense for both of us. Not romantic, but honest." "And now you're fighting to keep this land. Why?" Lydia looked at the courtroom, at Caleb, at Tom and Sam sitting in the gallery. "Because it's home. Because we built something here from necessity that became real. Because those boys deserve to inherit land their grandfather worked for and their father is trying to preserve. Because sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing, and I learned that lesson when I got fired. I'm not going to unlearn it now. It was honest. Completely, vulnerably honest. Lydia saw the judge's expression shift slightly. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The railroad lawyer tried to rattle her on cross-examination, but Lydia had been dealing with hostile questioners since her first teaching position. She stayed calm, factual, and refused to be provoked. When Caleb testified, he was blunt about the incidents, the cut fences, the missing cattle, the riders who'd threatened his family. "Did you report these incidents to authorities?" the railroad lawyer asked. "Who was there to report to?" "Until Marshal Hawkins got involved, we were on our own." "So we only have your word that these incidents occurred." "You have my word. Martha Hendricks' word. Willem Coroner's word. The word of multiple witnesses. At some point, you either believe people or you don't. Or at some point, the lawyer suggested, people fabricate stories to justify unreasonable positions." "You think I fabricated my barn burning?" Willem called from the gallery. Judge Harrison slammed her gavel. "Order one more outburst and I clear this courtroom." But the damage was done again, this time in their favor. The railroad had overplayed, suggested too much conspiracy. The case went on for 2 full days. Expert testimony about survey accuracy. Depositions from intimidated ranchers. Documentation of every incident. It was exhausting, technical, and occasionally heated. Finally, Judge Harrison called both sides to order. "I'm taking this under advisement," she said. "I'll issue a ruling within 1 week. Until then, all railroad activity on the disputed properties is suspended. Marshal Hawkins, you'll maintain that suspension. Court adjourned." The wait was agony. They returned to the ranch in a state of limbo, not defeated, not victorious, just suspended. Hawkins stayed on, maintaining watch. Life continued, but with the weight of uncertainty pressing on everything. Lydia taught her students. Caleb managed the ranch. The boys tried to act normal, but everyone was watching the road, waiting for a courier with news. On the 6th day, Martha arrived at a gallop. "Rider coming from Helena," she gasped. "Looks official." They gathered in the yard, Caleb, Lydia, Martha, Willem, the boys, Hawkins. The courier was a young man who looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Ruling from Judge Harrison," he said, handing Caleb an envelope. Caleb's hands were shaking. He opened it, scanned the contents, and his face went carefully neutral. "Well?" Martha demanded. "We won," Caleb said quietly. "She ruled that the railroad survey was fraudulent, that their eminent domain claim lacked merit, that the pattern of intimidation demonstrated corrupt intent." Cheering erupted. Martha hugged Willem. Tom and Sam jumped around like wild things. Hawkins permitted himself a small smile. But Caleb was still reading. "What else?" Lydia asked. "She's ordering an investigation into who was behind the intimidation campaign, and she's granting us provisional water rights as a cooperative, pending formal registration." He looked up, and his eyes were wet. "We actually won." The celebration was loud and joyful and slightly chaotic. Someone produced whiskey. The boys were allowed small sips. Even Hawkins relaxed enough to offer a toast. "To stubborn ranchers," he said, "and the school teacher who wouldn't quit." But later, when things had calmed and most people had left, Lydia found herself alone with Caleb in the barn. "We won," she said, still not quite believing it. "You won," Caleb corrected. "Your research, your organization, your testimony, none of this happens without you. It was all of us. It was you leading all of us." He pulled her close. "I've been thinking about what you said in court, about building something from necessity that became real." "It's true. I know. But I want to make it more true." Caleb pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band. "I bought this in Helena before the trial. Thought maybe if we won, I could ask you properly. No transaction, no practical arrangement, just, will you stay married to me because you want to?" Lydia laughed through sudden tears. "We're already married." "I know, but I'm asking anyway. Will you choose this? Choose me? Choose us?" "I already did," Lydia said. "The moment I stood up to those riders, the moment I decided this was worth fighting for. But yes." Again, always yes. He slipped the ring on her finger. It was slightly too large. He'd guessed at the size, but it was perfect anyway. They stood together in the barn that had witnessed so much struggle and let themselves feel the weight lift. The danger passing, the future opening up. Over the next weeks, the investigation Judge Harrison ordered bore fruit. Turned out James Vance had been working with a development company planning to turn the valley into farmland and sell plots to settlers. The railroad route was just an excuse to acquire water rights cheaply. When the scheme was exposed, James fled the territory. The development company faced massive fines. Willem rebuilt his barn, better than before. Martha's sons started courting girls from town with the confidence of young men whose future was secure. And Lydia's little school grew, drawing students from farther and farther out, until there was talk of making it official, hiring additional teachers, building an actual schoolhouse. "You could run it," Caleb said one night. "A proper school, your own curriculum." "Are you sure?" "That's a lot of my time. You've earned it, and the boys are old enough now to help more around here." He smiled. "Besides, I married a teacher. Seems wrong to keep you from teaching." So Lydia built her school. Not the way she'd been forced to teach in Jessup, but the way she'd always wanted. Mathematics and poetry and critical thinking. Students who asked questions and got real answers. A place where learning mattered more than conformity. Tom enrolled, finally admitting he wanted to understand more than just ranching. Sam became her assistant, helping younger students with arithmetic. And Caleb occasionally stopped by to watch her teach, leaning against the doorframe with an expression that was pure pride. 5 years later, on a spring morning when the Montana Territory was green and full of promise, Lydia stood in her classroom watching 30 students work through a complex problem. Her students, her school, her life's work. She was pregnant with her and Caleb's first child, a daughter they hoped, though they'd love whoever came. Tom was 17 now, a young man who'd decided he wanted to study law and had been accepted to a program in Helena. Sam was 13 and had recently announced he wanted to be a teacher like Lydia. The ranch was thriving. The water cooperative had become a model for the territory, and Lydia had published a series of articles on frontier education that were being read across the West. None of it had been easy. There had been setbacks, disagreements, hard seasons, and harder lessons. But they'd built it together, a life that was real and earned and theirs. That evening, Caleb found her on the porch, watching the sunset. "Tired?" he asked. "Bone deep," Lydia admitted, "but good tired." He sat beside her, taking her hand. The gold ring he'd given her after the trial was worn now, scratched from years of work and life. "Ever regret it?" he asked. "Marrying a stubborn rancher instead of finding something easier?" "Every day," Lydia said, then smiled at his expression. "And then I remember that easy things don't matter. It's the hard things, the things you have to fight for, that end up being worth keeping. That a teacher's wisdom, that's a survivor's wisdom, which I guess is the same thing." They sat together as the light faded, two people who'd started as strangers with a practical arrangement and built something neither could have imagined. A home, a family, a future. In the harsh territory where survival was supposed to come first, they'd proved something more could grow. Not by chance or fairy tale romance, but through choice, through stubbornness, through refusing to quit when quitting made sense. And in the end, that was the real victory. Not the land they'd kept or the battles they'd won, but the life they'd chosen to build together. One hard decision at a time, one fight at a time, one day at a time. Until the days added up to something that looked like happiness, felt like home, and was worth every frozen step, every confrontation, every moment of doubt. Because sometimes the best things in life aren't the ones that come easy. Sometimes they're the ones you nearly die for and decide are worth living for instead. Tom came out to join them, tall and serious, and so much like his father it made Lydia's chest hurt. Sam followed, chattering about something he'd learned, bright and curious and full of questions. The four of them sat together watching the stars emerge. And Lydia thought about that terrified woman in the snow, 3 silver coins in her pocket, certain she was going to die. That woman had survived, more than survived. She'd found something worth staying alive for. And that made all the difference.